Okay, now we're looking at, what kind of section is this? Anybody? Sagittal. Great. Okay, now what we're going to look at are motor as descending tracts and somatosensory as ascending tracts. So your somatosensory is your afferent information coming into the nervous system. Your motor is the response, efferent, put out information. Okay, so somatosensory information is coming up and in. Motor information is going down and out. Okay, and this is just going to be a basic overview. No serious details. We're just going to talk about all the things that we might find if we did a cross section through the spinal cord. We're going to look at all the different pathways and tracks, not in detail, but just to kind of give you a feel for what could be there. Let's just start out labeling. So even though this is a sagittal section, ordinarily you wouldn't see this thing, but I put it in there as a reference point. What am I representing here with this line? Central sulcus, good. Yeah, and a lot of this class is vocabulary, which is why I ask questions. I need you to start thinking about what the words mean. This is your central sulcus, right? So, and the pre-central gyrus is going to be your motor, and then your post-central gyrus is going to be your somatosensory. Okay, moving on down. I've represented this before as like a circle with a little peace sign in it. What nucleus is that? Thalamus, good. Okay, uppermost portion of the brain stem is midbrain. Middle portion of the brain stem, pons. Lowermost portion is your medulla. And then attached to the medulla, coming all the way down, this is just going to be your spinal cord. Back here, behind, kind of right behind the pons. It's a little bit slow. Back here, this structure responsible for coordination and balance is going to be, that's your cerebellum. Okay, overall, good to see where we are. Now we're going to start talking about different things that are going to be found in cross sections of the spinal cord. And here I'm talking about up top, I use the word tracts. Does anybody remember what the word tracts means? If I say tracts, what am I talking about? Pathway. Is it gray matter or white matter? It is white matter. I am talking about myelinated axons. Okay, we're going to use a lot of words that are myelinated axons. I'm just reminding you that if I say tracts, I'm talking about myelinated axons. No gray matter involved. Okay, one of the first ones that we're going to look at. I had talked previously about, we're going to come out right here. There's going to be, neuronal cell body is going to be here. We're not going to worry about now. But this is just representing the dendrite that's coming out. And this dendrite is going to be, I'm just going to consider it somatosensory information. So just basic somatosensory information. So you have this dendrite coming out into the environment, and it's going to pick up some somatosensory information. We'll talk more about that as time goes on. But in general, way back when, we talked about two different tracts, somatosensory tracts, that are involved in conveying somatosensation to the central nervous system. Does anybody remember what those are? Yeah, so there's going to be your STT. STT is your spinothalamic tract. So remember your spinothalamic tract. We'll talk more in detail about what the spinothalamic tract carries, but in general, food touch, pain, temperature, don't worry about that. But yeah, we're just talking about the basics. What's the other tract that's responsible for conveying somatosensory information? DCML, awesome, yes. DCML, and DCML stands for dorsal column medial lemniscus. And I guarantee you we are going to say these words over and over and over again, and they are going to be so common for you. You're going to know, it's metasensory. By the time you get to neurorehab, second nature. Dorsal column medial lemniscus, DCML. I don't know why it comes through fuzzy up there, but okay. In general, somatosensory information. There's a dendrite here that picks up this information, brings it into the cell body. Okay, and in general, this somatosensory information is going to be one of the things that we see in the spinal cord when we do a cross section of the spinal cord. Just your general somatosensory pathway. Pathways are going to come in. They're going to travel up, ascend into the somatosensory pathway, up to the thalamus. Okay, they're going to do something different than the thalamus, but eventually they're going to make their way all the way up to the postcentral gyrus to deliver information that is carried by each of those specific tracts. Okay, so if we made a cross section through the spinal cord, we're going to expect to see somatosensory pathways. Okay? Specifically the somatosensory tracts that are traveling up the spinal cord. Okay, if we are considering motor information. Now, motor information, this is going to be an axon coming out here that's going to innervate skeletal muscles. Okay. Motor information in general has a couple of pathways, and we're going to start up here. There's a neuronal cell body in the precentral gyrus. This is where your gray matter is. It's going to sit right here. We'll label that as a neuronal cell body. Okay. There's your neuronal cell body sitting in the precentral gyrus. And that neuronal cell body has an axon that's going to travel all the way down, essentially through the midbrain, through the pons, through the medulla, and we'll talk about exactly what happens, but essentially its job is going to be to innervate skeletal muscles. We'll get into much more detail. This is just a broad overview. Now, one of the interesting things about the tracts overall is all of the tracts have a common origin and a common termination. Okay, and that's really how they're named. So if I had to name this tract here, does anybody know what this tract is called? The tract that is going to travel all the way down through the brainstem, through the spinal cord to innervate skeletal muscle eventually? Has anybody heard of it? It's called your corticospinal tract. So, corticospinal tract. Bless you. Okay, corticospinal tract, we can abbreviate that CST. Okay, for corticospinal tract. So, corticospinal tract, all of the axons in this tract have a common origin, and that would be the cortical region for cortico, and their area of termination is going to be in the spinal cord. So that's the corticospinal tract. That makes sense to everybody? You know, and if you want to, we can talk about the SCT and DCML. They're a little bit different because we're going to have multiple things. But here, corticospinal. Okay, these are just things. If we do a cross section through the spinal cord, we are definitely going to see all those tracts. Okay, tracts are nothing more than the myelinated axons. So, moving on, let's use kind of a green. Now, we have another, this is going to be a sensory tract, okay, or parasensory tracts. So this is going to be a dendrite. And then this, did you guys have a question?
Just the role of the thalamus.
It's about the somatosensation. We'll get there.
Right.
Yeah, somatosensory information. Sensory information. Okay, so we have this, another tract that we're going to talk about, and it's involved in carrying information up to the cerebellum. It's going to start here in the spinal cord. So it's called your spinocerebellar tract. Okay, your spinocerebellar tract. So it's going to start here in the spinal cord. It's going to travel up the spinal cord and then deliver its information to the cerebellum, hence the spinocerebellar tracts. Okay, for spinocerebellar tracts, what you need to know, there's two. There's going to be a dorsal spinocerebellar tract and a ventral. Spinocerebellar tract. And the role of these tracts is just to deliver, they're going to carry what's called non-conscious proprioception information, and we'll talk a whole lot more about that later. But you should know that if we did a cross-section through the spinal cord, you should expect to see dorsal and ventral spinocerebellar tracts. You would expect to see the corticospinal tracts, and you would also expect to see spinothalamic tract and dorsal column medium lemniscus. Okay? That's where we are. Other things that are going to be important that you are going to see up here in the pons, in the caudal pons here, there's something, and you'll get used to seeing it. Make it like a little kite. Okay, this is orange. Okay, it's gonna be present in the caudal pons. There's a little nucleus here. And what we'll find out when we get to the brainstem region is this is going to represent the vestibular nucleus. Okay, your vestibular nucleus is going to be responsible for carrying motor information. But notice that we're starting way down here in the pons, so this isn't conscious motor information. There's no cortical involvement in this information, the transmission of this information. What happens is you have your, out of the vestibular nucleus, neural cell body here sends out axons that go down, all the way down the spinal cord, and they're going to send information to extensor musculature. Write that down in a minute. So we started here in the vestibular nucleus, and we're going down to the spinal cord. What do you think the name of the tract is? Yeah, that's it. It's the vestibulospinal tract. Just that easy. Vestibulospinal tract. Okay, and that vestibular spinal tract carries motor information specific for extensor musculature. Okay. Clinically, I've done a lot of clinical work with patients post-brain injury. I like to use the vestibulospinal tract to work with these patients. Okay. It's really simple. It requires absolutely no cortical information. They don't have to have any cortex firing whatsoever. I know that if I get that person upright against gravity, that's going to fire the vestibulospinal nucleus, and that's going to cause their extensor musculature to fire. So I'm going to get quads to fire, right? I'm going to get my paraspinals, extensors to fire. I'm going to get cervical extensors to fire. Really important tract to use clinically. Okay, nothing more than that. There's another one we can talk about too. Up here in the area of the midbrain, that's something we're gonna use as a marker for the midbrain, and we've seen it kind of before. There's a special nucleus up here. Make it kind of a maroon color. This is called the red nucleus. That's your red nucleus. So red nucleus is nothing more than a bunch of neuronal cell bodies that form a nucleus in the CNS proper, and it resides in the midbrain. This red nucleus sends out axons that carry information down the spinal cord, and the name is going to be, for red, we're going to say rubro, R-U-B-R-O, spinal tract. Okay, your rubrospinal tract. Neuronal cell bodies are in the red nucleus in the midbrain, travel all the way down through the spinal cord, known as the rubrospinal tract. Okay, the rubrospinal tract is going to carry, in humans, upper extremity flexion, in particular biceps flexion. You're going to learn next year in neurorehab that two different rigidity structures, I guess, or presentations exist. One's decorticate and the other's decerebrate. Decorticate presents with upper extremity flexion, like this. Okay? That's because the decorticate is above the level of the red nucleus, so the red nucleus is still firing, so you have the upper extremity flexion happening. The other is decerebrate, where the person's elbows are extended. That's going to be your decerebrate because the issue is below the level of the red nucleus. Okay, just trying to make sense of everything. Just one more. Thinking about the last one, there's going to be something here in the medulla. I'll just put it as a diffuse. There's a diffuse body of nuclei that exists in the medulla. It's involved in general awareness. Okay, I'll start making it purple. This is the diffuse body of nuclei here in the purple structure. That's your reticular formation. Okay, your reticular formation is kind of like an off-on switch for awareness or brain awakeness or consciousness. Okay, so if your reticular formation isn't working very well, you're not aware. You lack awareness. Okay. Coming out of the reticular formation, we have axons that are going to travel down the spinal cord and come out. And this is called your reticulospinal tract. And it's going to carry information about extensor. It's going to carry information to extensor muscles. Sorry? It's motor, yeah. Yeah, we'll go over these in more detail. This is just a big overview. And that's going to be, so if we did a cross-section through the spinal cord, we're going to be able to see all these tracks. Okay? Thinking about somatosensory information, you're going to see the STT, DCML. You're also going to see dorsal and ventral spinal cerebellar tracts. All the rest of the things that we're going to look at are going to be motor. You're going to see your corticospinal tract, you're going to see rubrospinal tract, you're going to see reticulospinal tract, as well as your vestibulospinal tract. Okay. Questions? Great big overview. Gabby?
What's the word for cell body at the top?
Neuronal. Neuronal. This one, neuronal. Yeah, it's just a neuronal cell body. Just a. Okay.
Which extensions are specific to vestibular and reticular?
So, as far as the vestibulo, I usually think about all extensor musculature or postural extensors overall. The reticulospinal tract is similar, and if you can imagine, if you're awake, then so you wake up and you sit up, your neck muscles are firing, extensors in general are firing. Nothing, you can't say like finger flex extensors or anything like that. It's just in general, when you're awake, you're awake. Okay? If you're down, flex. That's the difference. So awareness is upright against gravity, so your extensors are firing. If you were asleep, you'd be not extended. Does that help? Or there's no specific extensor. And if you want to think of any of the postural extensors would be fine. If you need a specific, if you want to say cervical, perispinal, quadriceps, all your basic extensors are all going to fire. You're upright against gravity, or if you're awake. Reticulospinal, yeah. Reticulo and vestibular. Okay. Vestibulospinal is very specific. But for reticulospinal to fire, you just have to be awake, not asleep, right? For vestibulospinal to fire, you have to be placed in a position upright against gravity. So your vestibular system, we'll talk a whole lot more about it later on, but they sit in your inner ear, and they detect head motion up and down, and also where your head is in three-dimensional space overall. So if you're upright, your vestibulospinal is going to fire. Does that help? Understand? Huh? Maybe? Okay. Yeah, Sam?
So just want to differentiate between kind of, I don't know what the word is, but so if we're practicing balance with a patient with eyes open, single leg stance, that's more like they're very consciously aware of like just where they are in space. But
that's proprioception.
Proprioception. So we close their eyes. Is that also proprioceptive, or is it still vestibular?
If you close their eyes, you're taking away vision. Okay, so 3 different things are involved in balance. You have a complicated question. I'll try and answer. You're going to get to this when you get to balance. 3 different things are involved in balance. One's your vision, one's your somatosensation, or your proprioception, as well as your vestibular system. Okay. Everybody has a different dominance, but proprioception is going to take the most of it. Okay, it should have about 70%. Some people are more visual dominant. If I stand with my feet together and I close my eyes, then the thing that has the most information coming in, I'm forcing it to work as my vestibular system.
Gotcha. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So there are 3 different things. So closing my eyes takes away the vision part. If I narrow my base of support or stand on a piece of foam, that decreases my somatosensation or proprioception, and I'm forcing my vestibular to work harder.
Okay, that's what I thought it was. I just wanted to make it clear.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Ellen?
Yeah, and just, I guess trying to connect it into my anatomy a little bit for the spinal tract. For
The
all,
rubrospinal tract, yeah?
for like the flexors and stuff. Is that gonna like a C7 gonna?
No.
No.
No, C7 is extensors.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at 2 things.
Yeah.
C6 for your.
C5, C6 is elbow flexion.
They're gonna like from the brachial plexus are gonna feed in.
No, this is only from the red nucleus. The red nucleus sends information to upper extremity flexors. Overall, in the presence of cortical function, you're going to shut down the red nucleus. If you lose the cortical function up above, then the red nucleus has the ability to fire. Okay. All of this is controlled essentially by the cortical spinal tract and your conscious awareness. Okay. When you lose the conscious awareness, or if you have a lesion that's taken out all of this, then you can have either rubrospinal firing or rubrospinal not firing. It's all above the level of the spinal cord. Anybody else? This is a general overview, like I said. This is just a lot of information. This is all of what we're going to talk about. Okay. Let's move on to let's look at more specifically, just the motor. But this time we're gonna look at motor and sensory. Okay, but we're gonna look at it from the front, because different things are going to happen. This is where this is where some people can get confused. This is where you got to get this part, and we'll do it over and over and over again to make sure everybody gets it. This is going to be a frontal section, okay? Here's my midbrain, my pons, my medulla, my spinal cord, cerebellum, thalamus, my cortical region in general. What I'd like to do is I'm going to just kind of draw dots down the center of this frontal section, because I'm going to choose to represent somatosensory on one side and motor on the other. That way it should be easier to see. Okay, and in looking at this picture, you realize the cerebellum's in the back, so that means that this is going to be my right side, this is going to be my left side. So I'm going to label that as right and left. Okay, so I think this is going to be right. Is this? Yeah. Okay. This is going to be the right side, or my right side, or the person's right side, and then this is going to be the left side. And this will become important. You know, and this is the concept that you need to get. Okay. As we go through, it's going to come through even more. So let's talk about different somatosensory systems. Let's start out with the spinal thalamic tract. So, get to the bottom here. Okay. Way back when we were looking at neuronal histology, I talked about first order neurons, and I talked about the neuronal cell body for somatosensory neurons is going to exist in the dorsal root ganglia. And what's the structure of those neuronal cell, that neuron? Do you remember? What's the structure of somatosensory neurons? Anybody remember? Pseudo-unipolar, correct. So I'm going to have my neuronal cell body here. I'm going to have my little stalk, and then coming out, I'm going to have my dendrite. Okay, now for this is going to be, let's start out with the STT first, which is your spinothalamic tract. Okay, STT is my spinothalamic tract. Now, who remembers what kind of information spinothalamic tract carries? Crude touch is one of them. Pain. One more. Temperature, correct. Crude touch, pain, and temperature carried by the spinothalamic tract. Okay, these are very primitive senses. Okay, so this is a very primitive pathway overall. Now, first order neuronal cell body sits here in the dorsal root ganglia. Sorry. Sends out, here's the axon. The axon for the STT is going to synapse immediately with a neuronal cell body that's in the dorsal gray horn. We'll talk about that as time goes on. Okay, but overall, this guy right here, this is our first order neuron. Okay, if you remember way back when I was talking about somatosensory systems, how many neurons does it take to go from the environment all the way up to the somatosensory cortex? 3. Here's my first order. Okay, this guy right here, and you're going to find out that he's pretty typical of the second order neuron. This will be my second order neuron. What happens with the second order neuron is it's going to do something called decussate. That means it's going to send its axon out to the other side. Okay, and then once it does that, it's going to travel all the way up and synapse here in the contralateral thalamus. Okay, so let's go ahead and label this guy. So here is my, this one right here is my second order neuron. Okay, and this crossing over has a name. It's called decussation. D-E-C-U-S-S-A-T-I-O-N. And if you remember way back to the very first day of class, decussation is just myelinated axons that crossed over to the other side. One example that we gave of a large decussation was that corpus callosum. Okay, so this is just nothing more than myelinated axons coming over out of the second order neuron, crossover go ahead all the way up the synapse with the contralateral thalamus. And the synapse here with a special cell type in the thalamus. And I'm going to send information all the way up here to the somatosensory cortex. Okay, so 3-neuron system. So it's a little bit different. Now you can see all 3 neurons, and from the front you can see that there's a decussation that happened. Yes? Nice. Oh yeah, sure. Thank you. It's hard to do with this. And if you remember way back when, we talked about the fact that if you have a cortical lesion, so if the lesion is on my right side, it's going to affect things on my left side. And that's what happens. That's how it happens, because things cross over. Yes, sir.
So the other day in physiology, we were talking about some of the sensations and different receptors in the skin. Something that Dr. Blair mentioned was that typically temperature and pain have a kind of delayed response compared to some other sensations. So does that mean that the whole STT as a whole is slow, or is it just those 2 sensations that are slower?
Yeah, okay, so you're connecting things. I can tell you that STT is a very primitive tract. It's slower than the DCML.
Okay.
Okay, and it's due to have it being less myelinated overall than DCML pathways. So DCML I think of like a superhighway, really fast. STT, slower.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, Alex?
So, coming from the neuronal cell body in the thalamus is the 3rd order neuron?
Yes, thank you. That's 3rd order neuron. Yes. And here's your 3rd order neuron. Okay, and then this is going to the postcentral gyrus, or I'll just say somatosensory. Can you see that? Somatosensory cortex. Okay. Any other questions? Here to see what happens, and this is spinal thalamic tract. So first order neuron comes in, synapses immediately in the spinal cord, dorsal gray horn. We'll learn what that is in a minute, and then decussates. And heads all the way up to the thalamus, and then once it reaches the thalamus, synapses with the 3rd order neuron. 3rd order neuron sends out axons to the somatosensory cortex. Okay, very primitive tract, very primitive information. Now let's move on to the next somatosensory pathway that we've talked about before. So here's my neuronal cell body and my dorsal root ganglia. Okay, kind of similar situation. I've got a little bit of a stalk, and then I have dendrites. What was the name of that other pathway? Does anybody remember? DCML, good. So this is DCML. That what you wanted? Yeah, it takes a while, sorry. Thanks. DCML is dorsal column medial limniscus. Okay, does anybody remember what the DCML pathway carries? It's going to be fine touch, vibration, and this funky word called proprioception that I talked a little bit about a minute ago. And this is going to be conscious proprioception. Okay. So the DCML pathway, and just like before, this is still my 1st order neuron. Okay. DCML pathway has a little bit of a different ascension. What it does is neuronal cell body sitting here in dorsal root ganglia. It's going to send out axons that once they hit the spinal cord, they're just going to go straight on up. Okay? They're going to go straight on up, and they're going to synapse with the 2nd order neuronal cell body that resides in the medulla. And since this is a 2nd order neuron, what's the axon going to do? Decussate, yes, good word. So It's going to send out axons to the other side, decusate all the way over to the other side, head straight up to the thalamus, and synapse with its third order neuron. And label that. So here's your second order neuron. Okay, so second order neuron resides in the medulla, called a medulla. Sends out axons that decusate, travel up through the pons in the midbrain, all the way up to the level of the thalamus. Synapse with the third order neuron here that sends out axons that transmit information to the somatosensory cortex. Again, here's your third order neuron. So, the two differ. Okay, they're both a 3-neuron system. Okay, that's where they're similar. They're different and they carry different things. Crude touch, pain and temperature, STT, fine touch, perception, vibration, DCML. Second order neuron decusates in both pathways, another way that they're similar. Okay, and they're all also going to synapse in the thalamus with a third order neuron. STT decusates in the spinal cord. DCML decusates in the medulla. Questions about somatosensory pathways? These are the main ones we're going to look at. Sam?
I guess I should have asked this first time, but what exactly defines crude touch? Like what is that? Pressure? I'm not.
The base feeling of touch.
Base
Okay, so like something that's very, very fine. So if you took a cotton ball and just lightly touched your hand, that'd be fine touch.
Okay.
Okay, crude touch is touch. You feel that, Josh?
So the spinothalamic tract decusates in the spinal cord?
Correct.
Or
Comes in, synapses with the second order neuron. That second order neuron decusates in the spinal cord, travels all the way up. Other questions? Okay, that's somatosensory system. Now, let's look at the motor system, and I'm going to draw the motor on this side. And again, you can see that if there's a lesion on the right side of the brain, it's going to produce symptoms on the left side of the person's body, right? Now the motor system, here's the neuronal cell body up here. This is going to be your, it's in the motor cortex. So you have a neuronal cell body that's in the motor cortex, and it's going to send out an axon that travels all the way straight down through the medulla, through the pons, and then through the midbrain, pons, and then through the medulla. And then what it's going to do is it's going to decusate at the level of the caudal medulla, go over to the other side, and then come straight on down, and it's going to synapse with another neuronal cell body here in the spinal cord, and that's going to send out axons that innervate skeletal muscles. And I talked about this being a two-neuron system in the past. Sorry. Boy. I may have said this in the past. It's a neuron system. I may have mentioned this word before. This part, this neuron here, is called your upper motor neuron. Okay, your upper motor neuron is the neuronal axon. The neuronal cell body resides in the motor cortex, sends out an axon that travels down through the spinal cord, through the brainstem, all the way through synapse with this other neuronal cell body that resides. It's called this other is going to be your lower motor neuron. Okay, so motor system, really simple, just two neuron system. Your upper motor neuron and your lower motor neuron. That helped. Okay. And you can see, again, that if you have a lesion to the left side of the cortex, since you decusate here at the level of the medulla, you're innervating skeletal muscles on the right side. Okay, so that's why cortical lesions produce contralateral signs and symptoms. Everybody got it? This is a big picture overview, motor and somatosensory ascending tracts. Let's go ahead and move to spinal cord gradient. So this is my attempt at a rendition of kind of a cross section. So this is a transverse section through the spinal cord. But really what I've done is I've removed this middle piece. So these are just two different, this is a transverse section here, and I've removed this material in between, and then this is another transverse section here. Okay, just thinking about the spinal cord as being just straight up and down. Okay, that's what you're seeing there. So everybody got it? See where we are? And I talked previously about gray and white matter in the spinal cord. Does anybody remember which part's the gray part? Is it the outside or the inside? Inside. So this, if I had my pencil, is here. I'm going to make this my gray matter. Okay, so this is going to be my gray matter to give you a frame of reference. Okay, that's my standard. And then these are just this is one level. This is just a different level. I'm using two levels only because I want to show you somatosensory tracts on one and motor tracts on the other. You know, I'm going to get some water. Let's take a 10-minute break now, okay? Sorry, I keep coughing.